Hello, you've reached Christian-apologist.com, and this is S.J. Thomason, and I'm really excited that today I'm here with the Bad Temper Badger. Now, he says the Bad Temper Badger is a misnomer because he doesn't have a bad temper, and he's going to show us today what a nice temper and a friendly sort of chap he is. And he comes from across the pond, though we won't specify where, and he's got some opinions on the North Sentinel people, and he's also got opinions on Christianity and atheism. He's a supporter of atheism. And so today we're going to have a lively chat. So thank you for everyone who's decided to make your way here in the middle of the afternoon here in the States or wherever you are around the world. Really appreciate it. Please take a chance and like and subscribe. And let me go ahead and pass it on to the Bad Temper Badger, who's going to share his opinions on his background. So he lets us know a little bit about himself, and then we'll go back. We'll talk about the Sentinelese people, and we'll talk a little bit about Christianity and atheism. So should I just call you BTB?
Just Badger will be fine.
Badger. Okay. So Badger, here we go. So Badger, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm from England. I grew up in a Church of England kind of background. A little bit later in life, I realized it wasn't working out. You know, I didn't really believe the things that were taught to me as a child. So my sort of theological position is I come at things from an atheist perspective with hints of agnosticism if you're looking at it from an academic philosophical view. I may have to mute myself again for a few seconds in a minute because I think the smoke alarm has just started beeping again. So apologies, it happens. But yeah, that's my background. I'm British. I'm generally speaking an atheist and a little bit agnostic as well.
Okay. So the atheist belief basically says that you lack the belief in God, if I guess you go from the modern definition of atheism, and the agnosticism basically says that you feel like you can't really know whether or not there's a God. So, so we'll get into that in a little while. But before we do that, let's just we're going to talk about the North Sentinel issue that occurred not too long ago. I posted my opinions on this in the description here, so you can see exactly what I'm thinking about the North Sentinel situation. But basically what it is for thousands of years, and the estimates have actually gone all the way back to 60,000 years. So if you're a young earther, sorry about that, but that's what the estimates are. 60,000 years, these people called the North Sentinel people have been occupying this little island that's in the Bay of Bengal that's near India. And India actually has police patrols that go around this island, and they've been watching it and making sure that the island is safe. And they're actually also making sure that nobody goes to the island, because there are people on the island who have isolated themselves for thousands and thousands of years from modern civilization. So, of course, anybody who studies humans wants to get in there to figure out exactly how these people tick, how they've survived without modern conveniences that we all have. So a lot of people are very interested in these people, yet the idea is we're not supposed to go there. And in fact, 1,000 years ago, people tried to go there from different places, like in the Arab region in China. They tried to go into the Sentinel area, and they were basically abused. And so you go there and you get shot by arrows. That's sort of what has been happening. In the 70s, a person who was an academic researcher decided he'd try to be friendly with them, and he tried to get in there, but that didn't work out. People have tried to drop food onto this island, and that didn't work out. They actually shot arrows at the helicopter that was trying to drop the food. People have tried to visit there. There was actually some people went mud crabbing in a little over 10 years ago, and they went to this island accidentally. Like, they didn't realize they were on an island that was inhabited by people who were very hostile towards the outsiders. And those people ended up dying. So there were two fishermen who accidentally traveled there. I think the year was 2006. And they were killed because they visited the island. So today's conversation is going to center around a missionary, a young man who was, I think, 27 years old, named John Allen Chau, C-H-A-U. He decided that he wanted to go there and spread the gospel. And so what he did is he packed himself up a waterproof Bible. He paid a couple of people in rupees that ended up being about $350 worth of rupees. And he got these couple of fishermen people to bring him over to the island. And for a period of a couple of days, he was swimming back and forth between the island and the fishing boat. He had his own little canoe, and he was going back and forth, and he was trying to signal to the people that he wanted to visit them. And so he had his Bible. At one point, he held up his Bible. He said to him something to the effect of, "I'm here I'm here in peace. I want to spread the Christian word," something like that. He didn't say those exact words at all, but he said something to that effect. And the Sentinelese people came out and they shot an arrow that landed right in his waterproof Bible. And so they gave him a sign that they did not want him there. And he was documenting this. He had a little journal that he was documenting exactly what was going on. And in the link that I put here on the description, you can see some of his exact words and his thoughts and how this whole thing was carried out. But what happened is, after a short while, the fishing people who brought him there, he signaled for them to go away. So they went away. They came back the next morning. They went away one night, came back the next morning, and saw the Sentinel people dragging his body, this John Chow's body, along the beach. They had killed him, and we guess it's probably with arrows, but they had killed him, and they dragged his body along the beach. The Indian officials have not recovered the body because they're afraid to go there, because obviously the hostile people who live there, and also the fishermen have been arrested. So the Indian people who police that area have arrested the fishermen because they brought John Chow there. It was an illegal activity. The idea is you're not supposed to visit that island, and he visited the island. And so this is a really bad deal. So I want to hear what Badger has to say about this, and then I'll share my opinion. So Badger, what are your thoughts on this whole situation?
All right. Well, coming from, I think you may have seen us going back and forth on Twitter a little bit. My view on it is he shouldn't have been there, shouldn't have gone there. And while I do think it's tragic that he was killed in the process of going there, I don't blame the Sentinelese tribal people for the act of killing him. I mean, they did it. I don't think they were unjustified in doing it. And I will go through some reasoning as to why as we go through the discussion. But where shall I? Right, let me just get to the start of my notes. The Andaman Islanders are thought to have colonized the islands at least 20,000 years ago. The estimates range quite vastly beyond that distance. I've found quotes up to 60,000 years from different people. Some of them I couldn't find sources for, so I've just gone with the best source I could find, which was at least 20,000. They've been largely undisturbed by any outside influence for most of that time until the last few hundred years. Their cultures have progressed entirely separate to the rest of the world because of that. The Sentinelese particularly are isolated from their other neighboring tribes by the geography of their island. It's surrounded by reefs and adverse terrain for getting to and from it by boat. And it's not known exactly how long ago that separation took place, when they went there and became separated from the neighboring tribes, but it's thought to be quite some time ago, judging by the fact that their language is no longer mutually intelligible with the neighboring Jarowa and Onga tribes. It's no longer mutually intelligible, even in the same way that French and Spanish has a lot of similarities. Their languages, which are thought to come from a common root, have very few similarities from what has been heard. The tribes from other islands, when they reported listening to their language, couldn't make out any of it. So they've been isolated for a very long time. Historically, they haven't been treated very well, any of the Andaman Island tribes, by settlers from various different nations. Under the British Empire, the other tribes that are not that don't benefit from the isolation of geography, one of them is now completely extinct, and the others have gone from a population of thousands to a population of hundreds. Their lands have been taken over, paved over, built over by other cultures who have come in and taken over. Under the British Empire, they were treated quite badly, not respected, not looked at as people even. Sorry about that. They were several of the tribal people from the Sentinel Island were kidnapped by the, at the time, governor, taken to a different island for study. They very quickly became ill. It was an elderly couple and some children. The older couple died, and the children were returned with lots of gifts, although they were sick and may not have lived very long once they were sent back. Later, under the Indian government, various attempts have been made to contact the tribe, but they haven't gone very well. In the late 1990s, the Indian government decided that attempting to contact a people who were healthy and content and thrived on their own was doing them more harm than good. Since then, observation has only taken place by boat, helicopter, and drone. Now, on to why I'd say they acted in self-defense. Food scarcity. They live on an entirely isolated island with very limited resources. Their culture has existed for thousands of years, limited to that island. Their boats cannot go outside the shallows as they push them in the way of punts with a long wooden stick. If they go past the shallows, they can't propel themselves any further, so they don't leave their island. Their culture has grown up around this idea that they have very limited resources and they must look after them. So they would probably see any encroachment on their island as a threat to their limited resources. Historically, they haven't been treated very well by people trying to contact them. So that's probably become a large part of their culture in the last few hundred years, that outsiders are dangerous. Almost every prior interaction has left them in some way worse off, particularly through disease, even possibly contracted by, from gifts left for them by anthropologists. On some visits where people have gone onto the island, they have stolen things from the settlements of the Sentinelese people, which has, I'd say, undoubtedly left them with a somewhat sour view of visitors. There's also the possibility that they've witnessed the fate of neighboring tribes on other islands who have not fared very well due to the influence of other cultures. Now, this is why I think they should be left alone. Firstly, the right to self-determination. They've made it quite clear they want to be left alone. Every time anyone has attempted to go there, they have warned them off, even when acting in friendly ways with certain anthropologists who have made great efforts to offer them gifts and not go beyond the limits that they have set. Anytime the anthropologists made moves to leave their boats and approach the island, they were warned off by aimed weapons and violent gestures. Cultural preservation. They are the last of their kind. They are the only known uncontacted tribe living on an isolated island of this kind. There are other uncontacted tribes, but they mostly live in mainland areas. And also for their own protection. They could be wiped out by a sneeze. They have very little immunity to the pathogens and diseases of the outside world, as they haven't had any exposure to them. Finally, let's look at someone visiting them from their perspective. Imagine an alien invasion. They come from another world with technology vastly more advanced than ours. I'm trying to talk from their perspective as I understand it. They look sort of like us, but wrong, too pale and tall and misshapen. Their touch causes sickness and death. They have been visiting for a few generations and each time have taken captives, some of whom have never returned, and those that have were sick. They sometimes left things which looked like gifts, some of which made us sick. They steal our limited food supply, fishermen encroaching on the island, even if they didn't know they were. They wipe out our neighboring tribes, make them slaves to their will. They invade our home and steal our possessions. We're never sure if they're watching us. We see their machines fly overhead, sometimes almost touching the tree tops before we see them and ward them off. Are they planning an invasion? Look, there's one coming now. What do we do? What possible reason do we have to trust him and not defend ourselves from a hostile invader? Let's go back to you on that.
Okay, so you brought up some really good points. So one of the points that you brought up is the idea of modern diseases, and of course that is a threat to them. And we have experience with their neighboring tribes that also encountered and developed some diseases. And even if as you mentioned in the past, or even as you mentioned from an incident in the past with a couple of old folks and their kids, what happened there. So yes, modern diseases is definitely a threat. We saw that happen with the American Indian population when the Europeans came here. We saw some of the diseases coming from Europe that the Indians couldn't really handle. So that is definitely a situation. Another situation that you brought up is the fact that they've been in isolation. And I brought that up too. They've been in isolation for, estimates go all the way to 60,000 years. These people have been in isolation. So that's a pretty big deal. A third issue that you're bringing up is the fact that they're scared. I mean, they're on their island. They've figured out how to survive there despite very limited resources. And when they see people come from the outside, they're worried that, what are these people doing? Are they going to hurt us in some way? So there's a big worry there that that's going to happen. However, one of the things that I think that you and I have to differ on, or do differ on, is the fact that you're taking what we call maybe a relative morality stance on this entire situation, whereas I say I'm taking more of a universal stance or an objective moral stance. What I'm trying to say is we have principles. The United Nations General Assembly created a Declaration of Human Rights, and they created the International Bill of Human Rights. And they basically said that everyone is entitled to innate freedom and equality. So we could both agree that, yes, we want to give the North Sentinel people freedom and equality. A second one is there's a ban on discrimination. So we don't want to discriminate against them, and they're not entitled to discriminate against us. A third one is they have a right to life, and we have a right to life. So through the right to life, we'd say, well, we don't want to give them the modern diseases. And our right to life is that we shouldn't be killed on sight for merely appearing with a Bible in our hand or accidentally showing up there to go mud crabbing and end up being shot. And another thing that we'd like to point out, and that was in 2006 with the mud crab incident, is each group is entitled to equality before law. So your particular position takes the idea that we should give them special treatment because they've been isolated and because they're on this island. And there's only between 50 and 150 people, according to the estimates I've seen. So there aren't that many people living here in the first place. But you're saying that they should get some special treatment because they've been there for a very long time. They could get diseases if we show up. And we should devote the resources from the Indian government to police the area to make sure nobody shows up there for their hundreds of years to come, because these people are very hostile. Now, this goes back to Marco Polo, who basically pointed out, he said, these are a most violent and cruel people who eat everybody they catch. That's what Marco Polo said in the 13th century. We don't have proof that they're cannibals. No one's given any proof of that. We don't know, but that's what Marco Polo believed. And so this has gone back hundreds of years that these people have been known to be very violent. According to John Chow in his little journal, he actually called them the last place for Satan groups, groups who are basically Satanists in some way. So that's what Chow thought of him, even though he wanted to go convert them. So what are your thoughts on that, on the idea of, you're saying that we should give a special treatment to these people, disregard what the United Nations has said for all people in all nations in the world, because they've been isolated and because we're worried about modern disease?
I've got a few little comebacks on that. The first one being, you mentioned United Nations anti-discrimination in both directions. I believe the United Nations also grants that private individuals and private groups may own private property. I would consider the island to be their private property, their personal living space, and they have a right to say, we do not want anyone to visit us here. as for the, I think you said Marco Polo saying about, yeah, Marco Polo, I'm saying it all wrong. I think you said about Mr. Polo saying about they are cannibals. I did do a little bit of reading into that. If I'm remembering the reading I did correctly, that was later by anthropologists thought to be a misunderstood cultural practice of them burning bodies and cutting them up first in order to bury them and burn them more effectively, rather than cooking them for eating. I can't right this second confirm that because I can't find the source, but I will try to get back to you on that one later. Yeah, so what do you make of the private property argument?
Well, I think it's an interesting thing. In the United States, the idea is if someone shows up and invades your home, you're entitled to be able to shoot that person if you feel like it's in self-defense. But the question is John Chow and the fishermen, the most recent people who've shown up on the island of North Sentinel, were unarmed. The fishermen were unarmed. They were purely mud crabbing. And John Chow, his big weapon was a waterproof Bible. So these people were showed up unarmed and were killed. Now, I know you can probably make an argument that says they didn't know what his Bible was. It could have been some sort of bomb. I mean, for all they know, who knows what this thing that he was carrying in his hand. Maybe they'd never seen a book. It's very likely. So there is that possibility that they thought he was a threat, despite the fact he was unarmed. But I want to do one thing I think that people need to consider when they look at this argument is, let's consider the application elsewhere. What if a group of people decided today to go move into an island that's uninhabited and decided to make that their own island, and they decided that anyone who accidentally popped into that island or was shipwrecked there or something like that, they were entitled to kill them, even if the person showed up with no arms or anything like that, because this was their sovereign island and they were getting special treatment from the UN where they can kill anybody who shows up on site purely because they've decided that they're occupying this island. And for whatever period of years that this has been going on. Is that okay? Like, I mean, if we were able to give them special treatment, who's to say that some others won't come in and want that same treatment for an island they create on their own in some other part of the world?
Well, firstly, on the self-defense thing, historically and recently, not so much recently, but within living memory, a lot of people that they have come into contact with have made them sick. So it could be strongly argued that they are defending themselves against outside invasion in the form of anyone they come into contact with giving them sicknesses and causing them to die from illness. As for special treatment, I don't think it would be. I think their unique circumstance has to be taken into consideration. There is no one outside their island who can talk to them. No one speaks their language. So a group of people from another country would already speak a common language with that country at least. So they would be able to communicate verbally that they don't want people to visit. So it would be much easier for that group who does it now to say, right, we don't want you to visit. We will defend ourselves if you do visit, and we'll make that clear verbally beforehand. Whereas for the Sentinelese, they can't do that. No one speaks their language. Click mute accidentally. What do you make of that?
Okay. So the idea of somebody speaking the language. Now, there are other ways that humans can communicate besides speaking the language. You can communicate moving your hands, and you can communicate with signals and things like that are sort of universally understood. However, let's look at the situation of North Korea. Now the people in North Korea, the dictator in North Korea, basically, he does not want outsiders coming in. So we've got an example of Otto Warmbier, who made the fatal error of going into North Korea. He ended up getting 17 months of hard prison, labor camp. And what happened was it put him into a coma. He was finally released, and then he died. And North Koreans didn't want him there. They don't want outsiders to come in. So if you go into North Korea, you're probably going to die, especially if you show up, if the Bible in North Korea, you're dead. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're armed, you're unarmed. I mean, these people are, a lot of times in his case, college students. They were there for whatever strange reason their university let them go there. And there have been situations like that. There was another situation with a man who left a Bible in a bathroom. and ended up going into prison camps for that. So here's a place that's a sovereign nation that has determined that they don't want to deal with outsiders. So they've decided that they're going to put these outsiders in prison camps if they do something such as egregious as bringing a Bible into North Korea. How do you deal with a situation like that? Because I could actually say John Chow did about the same thing. He showed up with a Bible to a place he wasn't wanted, and he ended up being killed. Now, Otto Warmbier showed up into North Korea. He ended up going into a coma after 17 months of hard labor, and was brought back into the United States, unfortunately dead.
Well, I do think the North Korea situation is somewhat different. For a start, North Korea, though very isolationist, is able to communicate with people outside its borders. And the people who go there, while they may not be comprehensively briefed, are given rules to follow. I don't condone everything North Korea does, but I do think if you are going to visit North Korea in its current state, it is on you to make sure that you understand what the rules are. Sorry, what was the other point you brought up?
Oh, so I was just going to say, so what if you're maybe you're in an area close to North Korea, maybe you're a young man, young woman, you don't understand all of the rules of North Korea, you're on a boat and somehow you accidentally end up in North Korea, you end up across enemy lines, if you want to call it that. Maybe they decide they don't want you there, so they arrest you and put you into hard labor. Is that acceptable? Because that's...
Well, in the same way as the fisherman accidentally floating onto North Sentinel Island, no, I don't think that's the best way to handle it. But that is the way it is currently being done. I don't condone that. I don't think it's the best way to do it. But you can't actually go and explain to either of them then they're not going to listen to you if you try to tell them that. I think that there's a level of practicality that also needs to be considered. With North Korea, it's quite well known. Almost everyone knows where North Korea is. But, it's still possible to accidentally drift across the border, and that would be unfortunate. Most people who live near North Sentinel Island know where it is, but people who are floating around on boats out in the sea might not. I think that's why it is necessary for the Indian government to keep an eye on things. So I don't think that point was quite as coherent as I wanted it to be. I kind of lost where I was going midway through there. Could we just go back to what you said so I can just make sure I've answered it?
Yeah, no, I think you have. I think that both of us, okay, I think if we were to sum up our conversation and where we stand so far, you're basically taking the position that it's a sovereign nation. They've been isolated. If we do actually get onto their island, there's a very heavy risk that we could infect them with our modern diseases. They're not going to have immunity to those diseases, so they could end up dead. So those are the big issues. And then on my side, I would say that I want to apply universal standards to these people who live on this island, which would mean that you're not just able to murder people for merely showing up on the island unarmed with a Bible in your hand, or whatever the thing is, with mud traps in your hand to catch some mud crabs. In my view, I would say that I'd like to see the same laws applied to all people around the world, which are laws against murdering the innocent. And I think that that's where I stand. And I was trying to say, in North Korea, the United Nations holds them accountable for some of these things sometimes. I mean, right now I've seen the U.S. government's actually suing North Korea for the death of Otto Warmbier. And I think the estimate I saw was the government of North Korea owes the Warmbier family, I think I saw this number, I think it's right, is $500 million, because they've decided that there needs to be a price tag on the egregious treatment that they gave this young man. So so we're seeing people applying certain rights to, we're seeing people applying certain issues to one nation. So if you say the North Sentinel is its own little nation, do we give them the same sort of treatment as North Korea?
I don't think the same sort of treatment would apply, because the situation is vastly different. North Korea is a sovereign nation whose, while its population... Ooh, I'll just wait for you to come back there.
I can hear
North Korea. Sorry. North Korea is a sovereign nation who, while its population may not know much about the outside world, its leadership do. and its leadership act willfully to suppress its population and to cause harm to outsiders who accidentally or deliberately visit and break and do things they don't like. The North Sentinelese, can't speak today. The Sentinelese people don't have the same luxury. They have no understanding of the outside world, and their only knowledge is people from outside come and make us sick. People from outside come and take our possessions. People from outside come and destroy our food sources, and people from outside come and kidnap our people. That's their only contact with the outside world. So the situation isn't anything like the same.
Okay, so you're applying situational ethics, if you want to call it that, or relative ethics in a way. So I think you and I might be at an impasse, because I think both of us have our viewpoints, and I can look at the audience, and I'm really excited that there are actually a lot of people watching right now. And I've seen the views go both ways in the audience. I see some people are supporting your position, and other people might be supporting my position. But I want to ask a question to you and the audience. Do you think that our views on this are break down by whether or not someone believes in God or not? Because as I'm looking at the answers here in the chat, it looks like people who I know in the chat are atheists tend to be supporting the view that the Sentinelese did the right thing, and then there are people who are Christians in the chat who I see are supporting my view. So I almost wonder if we're taking positions based on our theological views rather than our political views or our humanitarian views. What do you think?
I don't think it would entirely split along theological lines, but I think in the chat it might, because it's. I think a lot of the people who would watch a thing because you're in it would agree with you, and a lot of the people who would watch a thing because I'm in it would agree with me.
That could be it. It could just be our friends.
Yeah. Just ring up all your friends and say, "Hey, I'm talking to this badger guy. Can you come into the chat?"
That is funny. Okay, everybody in the chat, thank you so much for showing up. I'm seeing some really good viewpoints in there, talking about things of self-defense and justifying murders on xenophobia, according to Eve. We got a lot of different views that are pretty interesting. So maybe we should. What do you guys think in the chat? I'll open it up to the chat if you want to ask a question or two before we go into another conversation and maybe talk about some of our experiences in discussing theological positions on social media, because I think that's also pretty interesting. And Frustrated Atheist wants to get in here too and talk about this. I don't know if if we have a way to let Frustrated Atheist in on this conversation. What do you think, Badger?
We could always have an after discussion and bring a few other people in to chat about it.
What'd you say?
We could always have an after discussion and bring a few other people in to chat about it.
Oh, that's true. That's true. We'll open up an after talk. So we can have an after talk, and we'll send it to anybody who's in this crew who wants to get in here.
If it's easier, I can organize a hangout for that afterwards.
Oh, you'll organize a hangout? Okay, wonderful.
I can if it's easier.
Okay. Okay.
All
so
right.
All right, so wonderful. So I'm trying to see if there's any questions.
What happened to no clickbait in 2019?
I know. I have a New Year's resolution. It's no clickbait. I have to be honest about that.
I did see that one, yeah.
Clickbaits in my Twitter in the last few years. I put things sometimes I know are deliberately provocative and that are going to attract people's attention. And yes, I'm guilty of that. I'm trying to stop. So, okay. So Stickman says, do you think there's hope for successfully contacting the Sentinelese in the future? What do you think, Badger?
I think it could be done. I don't know if it would be a good thing to do. There was some progress made by one particular anthropologist whose name I cannot pronounce and can't currently remember, but I can look it up later.
Oh, I had it. Hold on. I had that a second ago.
Yeah, I tried to remember it so I'd have it ready, but I couldn't pronounce it.
Hold on. I'll find it. Pandit. It was T.N. Pandit. He was an anthropologist in the late 60s, early 70s.
I think that might be the chap. Yeah, there was him and a few others who did make progress in trying to open friendly relations with the Sentinelese. The progress that they made, as I read, was they managed to give gifts of coconuts, amongst other things, and managed to swim in the water with them, although not too close, and share somewhat friendly sort of body language. Although as soon as they tried to go anywhere closer to the island, or one time when the guy's boat started to drift away from him, and they thought that meant he wanted to stay, they became very hostile almost immediately. So I think it would be difficult but possible. But if you look at how integration into a wider society has affected the tribes on the neighboring islands, I don't think it would be beneficial. They've gone from several thousand strong to a few hundred. And a lot of their culture has been lost. And a lot of them are not very well there because they've encountered things that were never in their culture before, like alcohol. So I personally think it's possible, but I don't think it would be a good thing.
Yeah, so you think, and I think actually I'm looking even, I think I saw Cameron say the same thing. Do we think the Indian government should send a force in there to prosecute whoever the murders are? And of course, we'd have to figure out a way that the government could identify the murders, seeing as there's a language barrier. But yes, I do think that they should do something about this. I don't think that allowing this is a good idea, because I just see it as a threat in the future. This will mean the death. If we ignore this, someone's going to die, in the future. At some point, it could be a fisherman who accidentally shows up there. Who knows what it's going to be, but people will be dead purely because these people now have been given a right to murder others who show up on their island, even if they don't have arms. So in my view, they should be prosecuted.
I don't think that would help, and here's why. They have no concept of outside legal systems. They have no concept of harm other than these people are coming to our island and making us sick. We will warn them away, and if they land, we will kill them. They would see any kind of encroachment like that as a foreign invasion and would probably throw absolutely everything they had against it, or vanish into the forest, or both. I suspect it would become a war on the island, which would probably wipe out the tribe.
Yeah, and as you're right, the tribe is very small. The tribe, from the estimates that we've seen lately, it's only about 100.
The highest estimate I've heard was 500, and they thought that because of the size of the island, that's unlikely. It's probably 150 maximum.
Yeah, that's what I saw. Between 50 and 150, I actually saw. So it's yeah. So we got some issues. So yeah, I'm looking at the chat again. We've got a lively conversation going on the side, which is
very lively. Yes.
So let me ask you this, Badger, on a different topic. How did you decide, and how did you come to be an atheist? How did you? Because I know you're over there across the pond, and I know that the trends over in that part of the world are actually moving more towards atheism. Although I have some friends who would disagree with that, who live there, but the numbers that I've seen from places like the World Value Surveys indicate that there's a move towards secularization in your part of the world. And I've seen in your particular country, I've actually had friends complain that they feel like it's too politically correct. Like you're not able to say some of the things that you might want to say because it's become so politically correct and so tolerant of different people's ideas, no matter how extreme the ideas are, that the door is truly open to full tolerance and closed to religious views. Is that a view that you think is true?
I'd agree that it's become too politically correct, but I wouldn't say exactly in those ways. It's not just a detriment to religious people. It's a detriment to anyone who wants to have an open and honest discussion on almost any topic, because you can't say something too controversial without it potentially being a big risk to you.
And how is it a risk? Because I honestly, I've heard a lot about this lately, and it's really started to fascinate me to the point where I almost wonder if I should think about writing a paper on it. I mean, like not a blog, but an actual academic paper, because this is pretty serious. So you think that the trends there now, is there a chance you'd lose your job by saying something that's decide, maybe you say something about a different sort of a person or a different person's views, and suddenly you might be losing your job. Like something, there's been a Muslim influx in your area, for example. If you said something about a Muslim person, is there a chance you could lose your job?
That has happened to quite a few different people, particularly people in political office. Well, all you have to do really is look at the case of Count Dankula, or Marcus Meekin as he's known when he's not being an internet edgy boy. He made an edgy joke about a dog, well, with his dog doing a Nazi salute, and has been dragged through the courts for several years because of it. There's other examples of political figures, political figures, celebrities. Stephen Fry was at one point that police in one area were inquiring about a comment that he made at some point, criticizing. I think it was criticizing Christianity, but I may have that incorrect. Stephen Fry was investigated for it. So yes, there is a lot of difficulty with that in this country. That's one of the things that I'm particularly keen on my channel, is freedom of speech and trying to get that as a recognized right that cannot be taken away.
Yeah, and that's very interesting to me, because I feel like a lot of the world is actually moving towards that position. In fact, I would say that America, the United States, I should say United States of America, is starting to move towards that idea of let's appreciate tolerance, but it's not necessarily tolerance for every group. It's definitely not tolerance for the majority group, or in our country, the majority group happens to be Christian. It's not tolerance for someone who has Christian beliefs. It's for people who are against Christianity. I mean, that's at least what I'm seeing over here, a little bit. But would you, and some would argue against that. Some would say that Christians are pushing their values on others, and you could probably make an argument for that in certain cases. So I can't make that.
I'd argue that it's both. I'd argue it's both. There's people with a Christian perspective who are being silenced, and there's people from other perspectives who say the wrong thing who are being silenced.
Yeah. So who's doing the silencing?
It varies. It's.
In your country, who would you say? Would you say it's the media, or the government, or
I'd say
employers?
It's the media, it's the government, it's employers to a lesser extent, and then it's just the court of public opinion.
And you've mentioned a few examples of people actually who've had some detrimental impacts based on the fact that they expressed their views that were maybe unpopular views in some way.
Yeah, it's quite easy to get a mob of, well, just even a Twitter mob at times will do it. Getting a Twitter mob together to bombard an employer with complaints, and then they go, "Oh, you're causing us problems. We'll get rid of you." Yeah.
And speaking of, as someone who's actually dealt with the bombarding of complaints in my employer, at my employer's place, yeah, I understand that. So actually, I'm meeting tomorrow with an administrator in my university because of the exact same problem. So I'm keen to this. I'm very keen to this whole thing. I was in the
comments of one of those threads saying, "Yeah, don't do that."
Yeah.
I am opposed to that. I'm not opposed to people being able to speak their minds. I am opposed to them doing it in such an aggressive way that in these sensitive times cause people to lose their jobs, unless they are doing something that they actually shouldn't be doing in their jobs.
Right. Well, that goes back, and one of the people, a person I support actually, and it's not because I take his position at all, is the guy called Raif Badawi. He's a person who's been imprisoned in Saudi Arabia now for almost 6 years. The poor man's taken a beating, physical beating. He's been whipped.
Yeah, I've been following the events recently.
What's that?
I've been following the events as well.
Yeah, but he's an example in case anyone doesn't know him. He's a guy who was just running a blog. That's all he did. He had a blog. He's not a Muslim. He didn't want to be a Muslim anymore. He was raised in the Muslim faith, and he decided to break away. And I think he might be an atheist, but he hasn't exactly made that completely clear, probably for reasons of keeping himself safe. But he's been imprisoned. He's got 4 more years to serve. He has 3 kids and a wife. And there are a lot of people trying to get him out of prison, but he's still there. And again, that's what we could come to if we get to a society where we're not allowed to express our views. And whether, I mean, I might not agree with an atheist view, I might not agree with the Muslim view, but I'm sure going to agree with your right to express them.
I'm in the same boat there. I don't agree with most religious views, but I think people should have the right to believe whatever they believe and to express that. The only time that I disagree with expressing that is that if someone is expressing it to someone who doesn't want to listen. For example, well, missionaries would be a bit of an example, but I don't want to say that about all missionaries, because some of them do very beneficial things, you know, going to other countries and doing charity work and providing aid to people who need it. I just oppose the some of the proselytization that goes with it.
And, you know, I don't know, I'm not familiar with this. I just saw, I think it was UAKT, I forgot the initials, but he just said something about Article 13. Are you familiar with that? Because I'm not familiar with that. It sounds like something that's from your country.
TKUA, yes. I've been trying to do something about that myself, although, you know, I have a very small YouTube channel and very little other influence, so...
But what is it? What is Article 13? What does that say?
Oh, it's something coming down from the EU, which is a copyright directive, which isn't a law in and of itself, but is a directive which for member states to then apply in their own laws. It's to do with copyright, and the idea would be that in order to upload something to the internet, it would have to go through a sort of automated vetting process to make sure it doesn't violate copyright. That's one of the aspects of it. That's the aspect that's most strongly opposed by a lot of free speech advocates.
And that might be because a lot of times people upload other people's YouTube videos, like they want to make comments on what someone said.
Or response videos would, although they do come under fair use in most countries, they would fall foul of that regulation.
Yeah, yeah. And I've actually even seen, you know, the Pakistan government's been stepping in as far as people saying things about their government on YouTube, and they've been stepping in trying to prohibit that. So. So we've seen some issues. So yeah, this is a really interesting thing. And actually what's interesting again is because the internet wasn't around, you know, a few decades ago, we basically, I've seen something that said the US government actually created the internet in the late 60s, but it wasn't brought out and shared with the public for until decades later. So it's kind of all a new thing, how we handle these sort of situations, how we handle free speech, how we handle people's right. You know, you're balancing something, your right to free speech, but you also want to make sure that people aren't completely abusing other people. So you've got
a comment that I made on it. Yeah, a comment that I made on it a little while ago was the internet should not be restricted to comply with outdated copyright. Copyright should be updated to fit with the internet. So that would mean a lot more fair use protections and the ability to share content and resources a lot more easily without the risk of copyright problems, but still the ability to protect copyright for people who do want to, you know, restrict access to their things. But yeah, fair use to still apply to that.
Yeah. So I see another Abba is going back a little bit. Donegal says, how can a Christian voice sound a sound objection to Chow's actions if he believed he was called by God, the Holy Spirit, to witness, and he acted in obedience to the Great Commission? That's a really good question, because the question is, do we feel as a Christian, do I feel Chow was called by God to do this? I do feel that Chow had God's influence in some way. And the reason I'm saying that is because he actually said if something happens to him, he didn't want the Sentinelese people to be punished. So even though I say
I was going to bring that up as well.
Punished, Chow didn't say that. So I think that's kind of like, it's almost like he felt like he was doing something. He was going to expose this issue for the world. I'm not sure what his entire purpose was. I do want to say that for his parents' sake, I don't think that his whole labor was in vain. I think in some way someone's going to be brought closer to the Lord because they see someone's courage in trying to spread the word to people who've never heard it. So I would say that. But I haven't, you know, as a person looking from abroad, I don't know exactly what all of the reasons are behind all of this kind of stuff and what God's influence was specifically, obviously. So what do you think?
Well, coming from an atheist perspective, no, I don't think he would have been influenced by a god to do any of it. I think it came from inside his own mind. But looking at it for someone who believes that he was influenced by a god, by a personal, all-knowing, all-loving creator God, I can understand why he would do what he did. I just don't think it was advisable or beneficial to anyone.
Yeah, it was a tough. I think we probably could both agree. He was a nice kid. He had good intentions. Unfortunately, they just didn't work out. I mean, I think that would be probably fair to say.
I do have a few questions coming up from the couple of people watching on my channel as well.
Oh, okay. If you want to ask those.
Yeah, I've got a couple coming up here. One was, how does SJ justify that missionary potentially making the entire civilization extinct from the diseases he was carrying?
How do I justify him making number one,
potentially.
Number one, he's assuming that Chow was carrying diseases. I mean, I think that's not an exactly fair statement. I think he showed up there healthy, so I can't say that he's showing up with smallpox or something like that that's going to be transferred to the people on the island, because we have no evidence that Chow had any diseases when he went there. So I don't think it's
I agree with that. However,
wipe out the whole island when the guy showed up healthy.
I agree with that first part. However, sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you there. They have no immunity to things that he could just be carrying on his skin or in his hair or on any of the items he brought with him. He could have, for example, he could have gone with a little sniffle and sneezed and potentially wiped out the whole society.
Well, that's speaking hypothetically, but we have no evidence that he had any disease or anything on his skin. That, I mean, you guys are speaking speculatively, and that's okay. But I could also speak speculatively about what we should do about these people who decide they're going to kill anyone who shows up on their island purely because they have decided that that's what they've been doing and they've been getting away with it, and no one's questioning them, and no one questioned them in 2006, so they're going to keep doing it. They weren't questioned in 2018. Now we can look forward to seeing probably exactly the same thing repeat itself in 2025. I'll guess that'll be the year.
It's possible. There was another one, just a second. Why is she not holding her side accountable? I'm not quite sure for what specifically. I wasn't looking at the chat exactly when that was said, so I don't know what was being said at the time. I'll ask it for clarification on that one. I didn't quite read what it said before I read it out.
I can say the Indian government has decided to hold the fishermen who brought him there accountable. So the Indian government actually arrested the fishermen who carried Chow over there. So we know that they're under arrest. So someone has held the people who brought him there accountable. So his accessories
held someone accountable. There was another thing from the same guy, which I think is to me, and I think is me referencing Count Dankula earlier, which was, are we just going to avoid all the videos he made with clear white nationalist dog whistling? Are we just going to ignore everything aside from his non-joke? I don't personally agree that that was the content of his videos, but that's up for debate and beside the point I'm trying to make. My point isn't whether or not he said something objectionable. My point is he shouldn't have been arrested and dragged through the court systems, even if he did.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Dragged through the court systems?
The guy that I'm talking about was arrested and fined a lot of money, which he's refused to pay for a joke he made. There's some debate in some circles as to whether it was a joke. I personally agree with him that it was a joke, whether or not people found it funny.
That's actually, that brings up a really good point. What are your experiences with people on social media when you try to joke and maybe you forgot to put a little emoticon in there and people don't take it as a joke? I mean, it's like there's so many people who are so serious and I feel like they're ready to jump down my back. I mean, I could go out and make a joke and say the sky's red today just for fun, and a bunch of people would show up and be like, "You're a fool, the sky's blue." I'm like, come on, man.
I had an
I mean,
experience with
seriously,
that.
lighten up.
I had an experience with that a little while ago. Actually, there's a chap that I have been in a few group live streams with, but don't know particularly well. He was responding to something that somebody said, and they were going back and forth in what could be taken as either an argument or a joke. I'm not sure which it was, and I'm not sure that either of them knew whether they were joking or arguing either. So I tried to assume that it was a joke rather than an argument and join in. So I said something, and it was taken it was responded to in a more hostile way than I expected. So I was a little bit kind of, oh, okay. I tried to bring it back and keep everything friendly, but that was taken the wrong way as well, and it all went downhill. I think everyone misunderstood everyone else in that conversation.
Yeah, it's a tough situation when that happens. So that always makes things tough. So what else should we chat about? What else, audience? What else would you guys like to see about? We've got Artisan Tony. He's my good buddy. I was just on his channel, so please go over to Artisan's channel. In fact, I'll put a link in there just in case you want to. But he has a battery-powered Badger that we're looking at. I noticed that you're keeping yourself anonymous, and I suspect that's because you're looking to protect your job from being, invaded with your political views or your personal views and religious views.
There is an aspect to that, and also, if you look at a lot of the atheist and in quote skeptic community channels, a lot of them use anonymous avatars, and that's not just because of that. That is partly because of protecting oneself from being targeted for harassment, but it's also something of a branding thing. And a lot of people who watch those channels, me included, kind of prefer seeing an avatar than a person's face, because I don't know exactly why, but I find it a little bit easier to listen to what someone's trying to say rather than watching their body language and making judgments about them as a person from their appearance. I find it easier not to do that if they just have an avatar that they've chosen how it looks, rather than whatever various nature forces, or if you believe in it, whatever god you happen to follow, gave them.
Okay, that's fair. Well, and it reminds me, I'm looking at your avatar. Something about it reminds me of C.S. Lewis's Narnia books and the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
that has come up a few times.
When they first appeared in the wardrobe closet, and they showed up in Narnia, and they met that guy.
Along with Wind in the Willows, actually, that occasionally comes up.
Yeah. So that's fair enough. And I think that, it depends on people's reasoning for avatars. If they're using it because they want to try to abuse other people, well, that's a problem. But if they're using it for reasons to protect themselves against being abused, and that happens too, I think that seems quite reasonable.
Yeah, there's some people, particularly people who have escaped from cults, or although it's a little bit of a contentious subject to bring up, certain Islamic countries, talking through a pseudonym is much safer for them. Not just because of harassment from random online individuals, but because of people that they know and are trying to track them down. Also, people who've got out of abusive relationships.
Yeah, you're right. So let me ask you this. Do you feel it's easier in your part of the world to be an atheist or to be a Christian? Which one would be the easier way to live? Because I would say it's easier in the United States to be a Christian. In all fairness,
easier.
The vast majority of people are Christian here, so there's safety in numbers, if you want to call it that. But what would you say there?
I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you. I have experienced both, but I've only really experienced the atheist side of it as, an active person in the discussion in communities that discuss this kind of thing as an adult, and I've only really dealt with the Christian side of it as a child and adolescent. So I don't have a solid frame of reference to compare the two. From my sort of limited experience and what I've spoken to other people about, I'd say unless you have some really wacky beliefs, there isn't a huge amount of difference. People can choose to go to church on a Sunday, or they can choose not to. In most circumstances, apart from the village I grew up in, the church there was a little bit culty, so this didn't quite apply so much there. But in most circumstances, nobody really cares either way, unless you're making it an issue.
So let me ask you this: how did you decide to leave Christianity? So you mentioned a little bit of cultish? You said, was it? And you said maybe the church you were raised in maybe seemed a little cultish, and you felt like you had to break away,
Yeah.
or what's your reasoning?
Can I just get back to you in a second on that? I just need to sort something out. Something's gone wrong on my end.
Oh, sure. So
I will be right back. I'll be about 1 minute.
While you're doing that, I have an opinion from Artisan Tony. He said, in today's culture, he's also from the United States. He said, in today's culture, it's easier to be an atheist because the internet harbors a lot of hate for Christians. And I have seen some of that too. You know, we definitely see some of the some toxicity. So we've seen that, and I would say that the atheists, in a lot of cases, are doing a pretty good job on making themselves very vocal on the internet through their YouTube channels. I mean, I've seen atheist channels that have hundreds of thousands of viewers and subscribers, and I've seen Twitter groups that actually are pretty significant in size. And there's conferences that they hold now. The American Atheist also is very active. So we do, even though according to Pew, they only represent about 3.5% of the population of people who say they're atheists. This does not include the agnostics or the nuns, but they're a pretty vocal 3.5%. So that's just something that's out there. In fact, Seth Andrews said, "Hey, our numbers have doubled," this kind of thing. He said, atheists are going up, and he's right. But the numbers doubled from about 1.5% to about 3.5%. So, and that's over about an 11-year period between 2007 and 2018, according to Pew. So it is interesting. The numbers of atheists, people who are saying they're atheists, is going up in the United States. There's a trend towards this whole new atheist idea. But there's also a trend away from it. So I think there was a trend to be a new atheist, and then a lot of people are pretty skeptical of the new atheist group. And some of them are moving more towards the traditional atheism, like the Bertrand Russell atheism or the Nietzsche atheism, and feeling more comfortable with the intellectual atheism and intellectually robust atheism versus some of the new atheist philosophies of people like Richard Dawkins and those, I think, that are much more simplistic. But that's my opinion, which obviously I'm sure is biased with my Christianity. But that's where I stand on that, in case anyone's wondering. And I know I took advantage of Badger's moment here to out that information. So Badger, are you back?
I am back, yes. There was just one thing I've just thought of that I wanted to add to the previous thing about anonymous avatars. I mentioned that a lot of people prefer, on the atheist / skeptic / whatever side of things, prefer an avatar to seeing a human. And an example of that is, I'm sure I'm pretty sure I've seen you going back and forth with Godless Cranium once or twice.
Oh, he's one of many atheists I know with an avatar.
Yeah. He was talking about doing some videos somewhere where he would appear in person, and a lot of people would kind of go, "No, don't do it. We don't actually want to see what you look like. It's easier to talk to you as an avatar, to listen to you as an avatar rather than as a person, or, as a physical video of your person."
That's interesting.
That's come up a few times in various different videos. That I think it happens. I think Godless Iowan had the same thing, because he does appear in a lot of his videos, and same with Bionic Dance. Some people are kind of, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with this, actually.
That's interesting you say that, because I got in a debate with Prophet of Zod, and Prophet of Zod has an avatar as his usual thing on his channel, but then I saw the real Prophet of Zod, and then just for fun, I actually went into Thomas Westbrook. Do you know who that is?
I do, yes.
I forgot who he calls himself. What's he called?
Holy Kool-Aid.
Holy Kool-Aid, yes. Here's what happened. So somehow I was surfing around on YouTube, and I found my way into Holy Kool-Aid's, and this actually, I would recommend people watch this because it's really, really funny, actually. I found Holy Kool-Aid's YouTube video that's about a 30-minute video, and it's on his experience at the Faithless Forum 2018. So he went to this Faithless Forum, I think it was called Faithless Forum, Faithless something, Faithless Forum, I'm pretty sure it was called, in 2018. And there's him in this one video where he's actually sort of like a recruiter. He stands up in front of everybody. He gets the whole crowd engaged. He says, "Are you good at writing? Well, you should be writing. Are you good at doing videos? You could be doing videos. Are you good at putting this all together? You should be doing that." So he was a complete motivator. I mean, I felt like I was watching that guy, Tony, that really famous motivator, Tony Robbins. So I was listening to him and I thought, my gosh, it's like Tony Robbins up there for atheists. And it was really funny to watch. And then I thought, well, what else did Thomas Westbrook put out there? Because I really want to talk to him at some point. But what did Thomas Westbrook put out there? So I found another video, and this will get into the avatar idea. So I found another video that he put out there where there was a panel of all of these atheists I've interacted with on Twitter.
I know the one, yeah.
So I see in the panel, I see Prophet of Zod, I saw Godless Engineer, Caitlin Chloe, and they're all in this like crew of people, and they were giving a panel on, you know, their experiences being atheists and that kind of thing, and I found it really, really interesting to watch, and so I would recommend people go there, because I you know, you never think that, some people say that atheists, it's a lack of belief, that's the only thing we're organized on. No, I'm sorry, I went to the Faithless, you know, forum ish. I saw it on YouTube. There is a very organized group of people here who are doing something quite specifically to motivate others to follow their views. So it's not just, I lack belief. It's more like, hey, we all lack belief. Let's go out there and do this stuff. And so I found it fascinating.
I think there's a thing there about what you mean by the definition. There's the whole definition argument that people keep going back and forth on. But if we agree on lack of belief, the thing that all the people share is their lack of belief, and then some of them gather together and organize things to try to help other people leave their religions or do other things that they think are good in the world. I think that's kind of in a similar way to some church groups. They gather together in addition to that lack of belief. I wouldn't say it's part of that, but it's linked to that, because that's what's brought them together in the first place.
But would you say that it's because for hundreds of years, atheism was defined as not believing in a god or gods, and now
are we on about the believing that they don't exist?
Right. So believing that no gods exist,
as opposed to the negative.
Right, as opposed to the negative view of I lack the belief. Why do you think, and that started with Antony Flew in the 70s, why do you think that atheists made the transition? And I have theories, but I'd rather hear others' theories. Why do you think that they made the transition suddenly after thousands of years of being identified as people who had no belief to people who lack the belief? Why do you think that happened?
I can't speak for Flew. I haven't read all the things that he wrote about that. But the reason I look at it more that way than a positive belief that there definitely aren't, it's because well, you mentioned relativism earlier and relative morality. I'd say I'm not 100% certain of almost anything. There are things that I'm certain of, almost entirely certain of, like I'm certain I exist. I'm almost entirely certain that the world around me exists and that I'm perceiving it mostly accurately most of the time. But everything that I perceive is open to interpretation, and I could be interpreting it wrong. So I think part of the point is it's people who don't want to say that they absolutely believe there are no gods. They want to say that I think it's very unlikely, and here's why. That's partly why I look at it that way. I can't speak for lots of other people.
So I'm really excited to report I'm reading a book right now that was written by a person who's called Daniel on Twitter. His name on Twitter is something like Story of the Cosmos. And he wrote a book, he co-authored it with somebody. And it's actually, I'm into chapter 3 now. I'm on chapter 3. Really fascinating story and he compiles a lot of quotes from the last couple of thousand years, basically, on people and their views towards the cosmos. And he finds famous scientists and that kind of thing. And he's Einstein. He goes back to just a number of Kepler, just name it, famous scientists. And he has a pretty good argument for the existence of a power that basically powered the universe and organized it in such a logical and mathematical way that our brains can comprehend. So it's a pretty fascinating book. But I'm going to be talking to him on Sunday at 3:00. I just want to mention that to anybody in the chat. But I want to ask you, what do you think is the most, because you said you could make good arguments for there not being a God. What are your, and I know what I think is my number one argument if I were an atheist that I would be posing. What do you think is the strongest argument that there is not a God?
Strongest argument that there isn't any kind of God, not just the Christian one.
Right, right.
Let me have a quick think about that, because a lot of what I do is opposing specifically the Christian one, and secondary to that, the Muslim God, or Islamic view of God, because that's starting to become a particularly relevant thing in my country. I would argue, the thing that I go to first is absence of evidence for. I have seen no compelling evidence that there is one, other than certain philosophical reasonings, which I find to be based on either shaky or no premise. So that's my first one, is I haven't seen any evidence that there is, and almost and yes, everything that I have encountered can either be rationally explained without one, or rational explanations without a God can be easily postulated.
So if you were, so let me ask you this. So what evidence would you need? Like, what evidence would you find compelling? And it could be evidence in the universe. It could be evidence with respect to cosmology or our design, or it could be evidence just in your own personal life with respect to something like spirituality. What do you think? I mean, what would you
sorry, what was the question?
Like tomorrow, say tomorrow you woke up and God decided to make himself known to you. What would you need from him to justify your belief in God? Well,
the very non-satisfactory but most accurate answer was, I don't know, I'd know it when I saw it. But to try to put some conditions on it, I'd say something that is verifiable, testable, repeatable, and confirmable by other people.
So if you have a dream at night and you tell someone you had the dream because they can't verify it, repeat it, or test it, then really you didn't have the dream?
Well, I had the dream. I experienced having the dream, but I would attribute that to activity in my brain, which is entirely subjective to my experience and difficult to measure. It is possible to measure that there is activity in my brain. It's not currently possible to determine exactly what that activity is doing. There are a lot of ways it can be measured to determine that, to give strong hints as to what's going on, but it's not, there's no mind reading technology at the moment. Also, I often don't remember my dreams accurately. I wake up and I know I've had a dream, but I can't necessarily remember what's happened in it beyond vague themes.
So would it be reasonable to say that you weren't really having a dream?
No, I don't think it would be reasonable to say that, but I think it would be reasonable to say I may not have been dreaming about what I now think I was.
And actually that brings us to another point that I've had with some other atheists, and they say that they have had, I've met a few atheists who said they've had spiritual experiences when they were young that at one point they attributed to the Holy Spirit, or they attributed it to some supernatural cause. They were given some sort of a supernatural experience where something occurred that they couldn't have known otherwise. Like, for example, one person I talked to said he was walking along a road and he had a very definite sign from God, you know, don't go down that path because it's going to be dangerous. He went down the path anyway. He ended up getting beat up. There was another woman I've interviewed here. Both of these were on my YouTube channel, but another woman I interviewed said that she was given a directive while she was driving down the highway not to make a certain turn. She didn't make the turn and realized that she avoided a major accident that occurred right there in those split seconds. So those sort of situations have occurred to some people, but then when they become atheists, they look back at that and they say, oh, maybe this was just something that was a mental, something I can explain in my own mind rather than attribute it to a supernatural power that gave me information I couldn't have known even in my own mind. So how would you, have you had any experiences that you would say in your life when you were a Christian that you felt that at that time were given by God, but now you look back on that and say, nah?
Possibly. There were times when I did feel like there was an external something influencing me in some way. To go back to the example of the person not taking a turn because something told them not to, I have had sort of experiences a little bit like that, but there are several things that I now attribute them to, because as I mentioned, I kind of drifted away from Christianity during my during the process of growing up. So as I approached becoming an adult, I also approached, or rather distanced myself from religion. So now I look back on those things with a different perspective, and I'd say a more mature perspective, but I'm not necessarily saying that a religious perspective isn't a mature one. I'm saying that just my perspective looking back is more mature. The things I now attribute those kind of things to is subconsciously taking things in that I didn't realize consciously that my mind was able to interpret and give me some kind of warning or something like that, or just luck.
Okay, that's fair enough. So, and I always
I've just thought of something else. I once had a dream as a child, which I thought was completely real as I was having it, that I was being chased by a monster that was going to turn me into chocolate. I didn't start the religion of the chocolate monster afterwards.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have started a religion of chocolate monsters either. I agree with that. That's a good choice. Good one. Very good choice. So, so actually, let me ask you this, and I ask a lot of atheists this because I do find it curious or interesting to see what their answers are at this point. If you die, like right now, you've made the decision that when you die, or you have the idea that when you die, your body's going to go into a grave, and that's the end of it. Life is over. There's nothing else after that.
That seems the most likely outcome, yes.
Okay, so you have that position. What happens if you were surprised and you died and you thought you were going into the grave and you thought you were going to be, inside of a little place where you're in the grave, and instead you find yourself in front of the pearly gates in front of Jesus Christ? What would you do?
Well, that'd be an interesting bonus round. Sort of. Oh, I was expecting this to be over at this point. I suppose it would depend entirely on what version of the pearly gates I was in front of.
Well, we'll start with the Christian version, and then you can put another version, like if you want to say you're in front of the Muslim version or in front of an Indian version or something like that. But actually in the Indian version, you would have come back, maybe you're a cow, you're reappearing on the earth as a cow. So that
maybe I'm reappearing as a badger.
Recycled, and you find yourself in another body here in another sentient life form here on the planet. If you're in the Indian or the Hindu or the Buddhist version, and many of those different sects within those faiths, they do believe that they're going to be reincarnated in another life form, a sentient being. So it's not going to be reincarnated as a being that has no conscience. So basically. Yeah. So let's assume that you're being reincarnated. I mean, not reincarnated. Let's assume that you come back and you're
at the Christian version of the pearly gates. Yes. Can we? Because there's a few different Christian perspectives on that. Can we just specify which one I'm looking at?
Okay, so I'm going to say that you find yourself, and I just use the word pearly gates, although that's not in the Bible. That's just something that people.
Yeah, that's the colloquial. Yeah.
Yeah. So you find yourself basically in front of Jesus. So you find yourself in this position. You're in front of Jesus, and he says to you, tell me about the decisions you made in your life, and like your decision not to worship me. What would you say?
Let's go with the decision not to worship specifically. I would say that's, well, assuming that I'm not frozen and paralyzed with fear at the prospect of being thrown into hell, if I was able to answer in an honest and forthright manner, I would say, why would I worship someone who gave me who didn't present me with adequate evidence that they were what they said they were?
So you feel like you haven't received the evidence that was sufficient to warrant your belief?
Yeah. Rather, yes, I believe I haven't.
Okay. All right. That's so that's fair enough.
There's other things I'd add to that, but that's the sort of base level. You know, where were you? Where was all this? How am I supposed to believe something when there's other much more plausible options?
Okay, so you would say to him, where were you when something such and so occurred when you were down here, like maybe a bad event?
No specific bad event. I just say, well, where were you to tell me that you existed? You know, I had nothing to go on other than this old book, and there were a lot of other things like evidence that contradicted it that made me gave me the idea that no, that's not true.
Okay.
Why would you allow this to happen if you wanted me to believe?
So, and you know, it kind of reminds me, and I don't want to, I mean, people aren't going to like me for saying this. I'm looking in the chat, and I know there's a lot of atheists, including my friends, the atheists like Kyle. It's like, but
dear.
There's a Bible parable that is very relevant to this discussion, and it's the parable of the Lazarus and the rich man. And the rich man said, hey, go back and warn my brothers. I didn't know it was going to be like this. And the response was basically, hey, you had the book of the prophets. You were given the information. Now it's on you. So that's just what the Bible says. So you say that's an old crusty Bible and all that kind of stuff. But that's what the response is in that old crusty Bible.
I'm not necessarily going to say old crusty. My Bible's quite nice, actually. I've got a rather nice Good News Bible that I was given as a child. It's got pictures. It's illustrated.
Oh, that's nice. That's unlike mine. Mine's right here. It looks like it's a nice Bible. I like it a lot. Carry it around.
Yeah. Pictures have appeared of my Bible once or twice on my YouTube channel when I've been pointing out verses. Oh,
interesting. Okay, so you do sometimes go into the Bible and point out.
If I'm talking about a specific verse, sometimes I will point to that verse in a picture of the actual Bible in front of me. Sometimes I'll just copy and paste it and do a text scroll or something.
Okay. Hey, and that reminds me, I want to make sure I have a link to your YouTube channel on my channel so people can know where to find you.
I will put one in the chat for this in a second.
Wonderful, wonderful. And the other thing I just want to ask now, we're getting towards an hour and a half of our very enlightening conversation. I really am appreciative because I think you've shared a lot of good information with us today. I wanted to see if anyone has any questions in the chat, more for you than for me, because I'm on here more than you.
I do have a couple from over in the chat on my channel, actually.
You have a couple, sure.
Back to the island thing again. There's one which is, how can you justify going there when you know it's illegal in the first place? I think I know where you might go with the answer to that one, but you go on.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of answers. One is, yes, it's illegal to go there. You know, he obviously violated the laws, and if we want to go by a strict who's violating and who's not violating the laws, well, then that's something you'd look at. But then there's the humanitarian issue of and you know, you could make a judgment and say, well, he was full of disease. You could also make a judgment and say, well, he also maybe had the immunities that could have helped people in some long-term way if maybe he had an immunity to some disease that he could pass on to them. But that's just another way to look at that. But it's one of those things, and I try to take the view of what happens if another group of people set up their own little island and decided to make it illegal for people to visit the island and decided to murder everybody who shows up. How do we deal with that? I mean, how do we take this situation and generalize it to other groups? Because we can't. We're making a special case out of these people. We're saying you're special, you get to murder people. The rest of the world isn't bound by those same rules. But you are, because you've been doing this for thousands of years. And so I don't think that that's right. I think taking a global view on that's pretty important.
I was going to say that probably from his perspective as a missionary, it would be God's law supersedes man's law. I don't personally hold that, but I suspect that might be where he would come from if you were able to ask him.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, I would imagine he would probably say something like that. He was feeling like he was following the Bible, where it says to go to all four corners of the earth and share the good news. So he found
another one, which is yeah. Another one, which is, why is she not holding the Christian ideology that they can just go to any nation and spread their faith by proxy of God's blessing accountable for what happened on that island?
Well, I do want to point out there's one thing about Christians that I think some people overlook sometimes, and even what Jesus said about governments, is that as Christians, we are supposed to respect governments, and we're supposed to respect government rules. We're supposed to pay our taxes, for example. We can't get away without paying our taxes. And I know there are some Christians, and I won't mention names because one of them I'm hoping to have on my channel soon, but who think they don't have to pay taxes, and that's just not the case. You have to pay taxes. Jesus made that clear. That if you're under the law of a government, you're supposed to follow your government. So, I mean, there's some corrupt governments, obviously, that we also look at taking a view where you should figure out how to get away from a corrupt government. But if you're under a general government that's trying to do the right thing for the populace, you're supposed to follow the governmental rules. And in that case, if you say, well, the Indian government is a general, decent government trying to help the populace in some way, then technically you should follow the rules of the government. So.
All right. That's all the questions I've got on my end at the moment.
Well, let's see if we see, I don't see, I want to say before I go on, I want to mention thank you to all the people who I haven't seen in here, because I think we must have picked a good time, because there's a lot of people who are able to get in this chat that I recognize from Twitter. I see Spooky Bed Hair, Doorknob Head, people have funny names. Eve, I've seen Kyle in here. I saw Cam a little bit earlier. There's a whole bunch of people that I'm really excited that they decided to show up. And it must be also the maybe it's the topic, and maybe it's Badger, because everybody wants to hear Badger chat. So
it's just my innate British charisma.
Yeah, I know, that's the thing. See, the British accent is much better than my accent, so you sound much more sophisticated just by virtue of opening your mouth.
I didn't want to say sorry about stumbling over my words. I did want to say just sorry about stumbling over my words a bit at the start. I was a bit kind of flustered by this smoke alarm situation going off.
Oh, no worries, no worries.
I was kind of worried I'd have to leap out of my chair and go and take another smoke alarm off the ceiling.
Yeah, that happens to me. I've got, for some reason, I must have about 6 of them in my house, and every once in a while one will go off, and it's almost like a choir. Then they all start going off, and it's a little bit crazy. So I'm not seeing questions. Is there anything else that you think we should cover, Badger, that we haven't chatted about yet?
Well, you did ask me how did I drift away from religion earlier, and I didn't actually answer that because I had to go and deal with something. So I thought I'd give a quick rundown of. I grew up in a small village in rural Britain where there was a Church of England church and a Church of England aided school. I went to the school as a child, and I was taught both science and religion and all the various other subjects. I'm also dyslexic, so I struggled with quite a few of them. That doesn't mean I'm stupid by any regard, but I could not keep up with the reading and writing side of things. It was quite rare that I did a PE lesson, as in physical education, so gym as it would be over there. It was quite rare that I did a PE lesson at one point during my school time, because I'd spend the entire thing copying out spellings from the board, and I never actually got through them before everyone came back in. But onto the religion side of things, I went to the church for many years growing up, from when I think my mother probably took me as a very small child, and I kept going until mid-teens at least. During that time, I started to I started off just, oh yeah, this is what the adults are saying. This all makes sense. It must all be true because the adults are saying it. Then later on, I started to have things they'd say didn't quite make sense, and I'd say, no, that doesn't actually fit with my understanding of the world. I'm going to have a think about this later. And then certain things kind of popped into my mind as I was going through and going, I don't agree with that. That doesn't work. That's not how things happen. And there was the thing that really started, the first contradiction in my mind that came up for me was two statements, which is God has a plan for everyone, and heaven and hell are determined by the choices you make. Those things just set my brain just going, no, this is completely contradictory. It cannot fit together. And that I know there are plenty of explanations where people have worked out ways around that contradiction, but that was the thing that started me along the process of thinking, actually, this makes no sense. And then later on, I looked at evidence for and against, found a distinct lack of evidence that satisfied me for, and drifted towards the conclusion that it's probably not accurate. That's how that happened.
Okay, so that's interesting, and I took notes on that because I think that's it sounds like a little bit of were you raised in a Calvinist sort of a faith?
No, it's just a fairly generic Church of England, so kind of a Anglican Protestant setup.
Okay, so yeah, you see a little bit of it. So this is something that I want to bring to the audience that I think is an interesting thing that you mentioned, that you felt like there was a contradiction, is the idea that God has a plan, but yet people basically don't have to follow the plan. I think that's how you're putting it. But I think that you have to probably take the qualities of God into consideration when looking at the plan. One thing is God has a plan, but he also works with our decisions. So he actually, because he's concurrently in the past, present, and future, he can make decisions that, whether or not he takes what people do, even if they don't follow the path that he would prefer that they take, which is the path towards him. He already knows the path that they're going to take, and he works with it. And we saw that even with Judas. Jesus knew what Judas was going to do. Jesus knew that Judas basically was going to betray him. And he worked with that. He knew that was going to be also part of the fact that he'd be crucified, died, buried, and raised, and would come back and take the hit for all of our sins, essentially. So what I'm trying to say is that God has a plan, but the plan includes your choices already. So the plan already includes whether or not you chose to follow God. He's going to work with the situation he has, knowing what the choices you're going to make in that particular situation. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
No, I understand what you're saying. I don't think it checks out and makes sense to me, but I understand that perspective. There's other reasons why it doesn't check out and make sense to me, because to me that then doesn't allow for God to be all loving. But that's an entirely different discussion, and we are approaching probably 2 hours at this point.
Yeah, we're getting close. And actually, I would like to talk. I think you and I should chat again. And I'd actually like to pick you up on that part of the discussion, because I listened to, it's on my Twitter account today. There was a really interesting discussion by Ravi Zacharias that I put on Twitter, that he talked about different conditions that God could have had. Because one of the arguments people say is, hey, I could have made the world better. And Ravi said, well, here's how you could have had it. So right now we have our earth as it is, where we have good and evil, and we have people allowed to make a choice of how they're going to act in this particular situation, whether they move towards good or evil. They understand that the choice is there. He said, or he could have had a situation where people were not given any right or wrong. There's absolutely no morality there that's been given to us. A third situation that he said is, what if we only had the possibilities of choosing love? So you would have no possibility of making the other choices. And the idea with that one possibility of only having the possibility of choosing love is basically now you've got automata, where you have people who are forced into making choices that they aren't necessarily in line with. They're forced to be loving, even though they don't necessarily buy the idea of being loving. And so when you take all of those into consideration, according to Ravi, and he put it in a much better way, But he said that the truly loving decision is the one where we give people complete free will and let them decide and let them actually go through a whole learning process where they move towards an appreciation for what's love and what is not evil. And so that's the Ravi view, which I think is pretty fascinating. And I think it applies a little bit to our conversation.
Well, I'm sure that would definitely be an interesting thing to have another conversation about at some point.
Yeah, I'd like to.
I think if we set that as a topic, I'd be able to plan better so I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and by that point, I'll have written a blog on it.
I could talk a little bit off the top of my head, but if I'm going to talk on a specific topic, I really like to make sure I know what I'm on about beforehand. Yeah,
and actually I appreciate that, because you know what you did today that I thought was really great is the fact that you actually went and investigated the whole situation with the North Sentinel people, and you looked in the history and you looked at a lot of different angles, and I appreciate that. So you showed up prepared. You did your homework, and I think that always makes a YouTube conversation more interesting. And I think the crowd here in the chat, I think they enjoyed the fact that you came in with lots of backing for your position. I mean, you actually had lots of support for your view.
There's a lot more stuff in there that was kind of linked and connected, but not necessarily supportive or relevant to the conversation. There's all kinds of more facts about the various mistreatment of the tribal peoples of the Andaman Islands. And there's all kinds of there's reams of it out on the internet that you can read about these island tribes. But I tried to pick stuff that was relevant to the conversation and not too overwhelming. Yeah, no, I think you picked the good information, and I think that we were able to have a nice chat. We had a very pleasant chat. I think that people enjoyed that. And actually, I do try to not be
Plantinga. I'm sorry, I always mess that name up. And his problem of evil, he talks a lot about the ontological arguments and those kind of things too. So anyway, so thank you. Would you like to make some? Actually, before we go, Badger, I wanted to see you wanted to do an after chat here. I don't think I'm going to be able to make the after chat because I have to go check on the food I have downstairs, and my kids are about to arrive home. But I wanted to, and I have a turkey in the oven. Believe it or not.
Turkey, yeah, outstanding. I see.
During the week, it's actually much more economical than it is running full. Like I can take a turkey and use that for the next couple days. But anyway, so I wanted to see. Can you let us know how to find you? And how to find you both on social media, how to find you on your YouTube channel, how to find you if you have any other ways to access you, like if you have a blog or some other piece of information that you'd like to share. And that would be...
Yeah. Well, in that case, I am Bad Tempered Badger on YouTube. I don't have enough subscribers to have a custom URL, so it's best to just look for Bad Tempered Badger. I will send you a link to put in the description for the channel link. I'm also on Twitter at Bad Temper Badger, because Bad Tempered Badger was slightly too long for Twitter. So it's Bad Temper without the ED on the end. And I'm also on Minds and Gab, although very few people seem to look at those. A lot of my conversations are had via YouTube and Twitter. YouTube and Twitter.
Great, that's excellent. And Agrippa, I see you in there. I will unblock you, Agrippa, just because you said I block everyone, and that'll be more fun. I did block a lot of people, so he's right. But
I was just going to say, if you'd be interested in, I mean, rather than having an after chat, would you be interested in having a group chat another time where we could get a few people together who've got things they want to bring up with either of us, or just bring up in general?
Absolutely, yeah, I'm in.
All right, well, I'll try and I'll put a thing on Twitter or something.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you very much. I also see that Tribe 32, I want to say thank you. So you've had some very kind words. And yes, I do like to say a prayer, but I know that if I say a prayer, you guys are going to kill me. But I would like to say, Psalm. I think the greatest prayer that you can possibly say in a case like this is John 3:16. And
I'll cover my ears.
Just go look at it, right? Go look up John 3:16. I think that's all you need to know. In fact, even to speak to your idea of God's plan and heaven and hell, just look up John 3:16. That answers everything you need to know. So But anyway, so thank you so much, everyone, for showing up today. I really appreciate it. Please like and subscribe. You can find me on Twitter at LEAD, that's lead1225, or you can find me at my blog at christian-apologist.com. I hope you'll come again. Thank you so much.